Hello everyone, I am Be Better Gamer. Welcome to Be Better Gamer Wrestling. This channel is dedicated to the classic series of N64 wrestling games developed by Aki Corporation, such as WCW NW Revenge, WCW vs. World Tour, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, WrestleMania 2000, and today's video, WWF No Mercy, where I am continuing my Hardcore Championship Let's Play series, and I am going to be playing as Hardcore Holly. I'm finally getting to the man who has the name Hardcore in his name, or the word, I should say, Hardcore in his name. Hardcore Holly, a 6-time Hardcore champion. Really looking forward to this episode because Hardcore Holly, in all honesty, is a guy that I was never really fond of as a wrestler. I should say a character I was never really fond of. He never really did it for me. Every time he came out, I just never really got excited, never really got invested. Not saying he was bad or anything. I mean, he definitely had a beautiful drop kick. His hardcore matches were definitely intense. He was very aggressive. And right now I'm fighting Crash Holly, and him and Crash Holly, I think if anything, I probably like their run the most. I will be doing a Hardcore Holly and a Crash Holly, the Holly Cousins Tag Team Championship run, so I'm not going to be talking too much about their history. I have already done a Light Heavyweight Championship Let's Play series with Crash Holly, and I will be also doing a Hardcore Championship Let's Play with Crash Holly, who, pretty much jump-started the 24/7 Hardcore Championship rules. But Hardcore Holly, this is going to be an interesting episode because I think he has a very interesting story. He's a very divisive character, very divisive persona in the history of wrestling. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, all that he's been through. Also, I should mention in this episode, here I go, hitting the Falcon Arrow. He did a Falcon Arrow. I mean, you can't really get too mad at a guy who used the Falcon Arrow as one of his finishers. Much preferred the Falcon Arrow over the Alabama Slammer, but that's just me. And so in this episode, I just won my first match as champion already. I'm gonna win every single match except for when I get to the APA and they offer me their services. I'm actually gonna say yes and then win the last 2 matches. So here's Kurt Angle coming out. Gonna win this match. So Hardcore Holly, he actually started his WWF career, or WWE, but it was called WWF when he was in there, as Bob Sparkplug Holly. I remember him as Sparkplug Holly. I watched WWE ever since I was a kid, back when it was WWF, since the early 90s, 91, 92, probably even 1990 I was watching it. I don't remember that far back, but I definitely remember seeing Bob Sparkplug Holly on, episodes of, the Saturday morning WWF shows they used to have and stuff like that. So he was originally brought in as Thurman Sparky Plug, but his name was changed, fairly quickly to Bob Sparkplug Holly, and that's pretty much what he was known as for the whole time. And he was a race car driver. This was during the era of WWF where everyone had a gimmick that kind of related to an occupation. Isaac Yankum, the dentist, aka Kane, Duke the Dumpster Drozy, aka he was a garbage man. IRS, he was a tax man. Like everyone had a stupid gimmick. As a kid, you don't really mind it, I didn't really mind it. It's like, oh, he's a race car driver who's a wrestler. Oh, I guess, whatever. Where's Ultimate Warrior? Where's Hogan? But looking back on it, you really understand how WCW was able to easily win the ratings war when they started transitioning to the more edgy stuff with the NWO, which sort of sparked the Attitude Era, which I think Hardcore Holly is one of the best examples, honestly, of a wrestler who benefited so much from the birth of the Attitude Era. Even though he wasn't a main eventer, even though he never held any of the world championships, you're going to see his transition from Sparkplug to Hardcore. The Attitude Era helped, and if it wasn't for that Attitude Era, not just wrestling wouldn't be the same, wouldn't be what it is today, but a lot of wrestlers I don't think would have lasted as long. So, as Sparkplug, he was an underdog. He was kind of like a jobber, lower tier card. Didn't really accomplish. He was a baby face. Every time he came in, you always hoped that he would win, but he would never get the big wins. And his two big highlights as Bob Sparkplug Holly. He formed an alliance with 123 Kid, aka X-Pac, Sean Waltman, and they briefly held the tag team championship, the World Tag Team Championship. That was Hardcore Holly's first championship in WWF, was the tag team title with 123 Kid. They only held it for a day. They held it for a day, and then they would lose it the next day. And then he also formed the new Midnight Express during his time. This was him transitioning from Bob Sparkplug Holly. Him and Bart Gunn, who had split up from Billy Gunn, who would end up to form the New Age Outlaws. Him and Bart Gunn, they would form the new Midnight Express. Bobby. Well, the one I'm familiar with is Bobby Eaton and Condrey. But Dennis Condrey, Randy Rose, Norvell Austin, the original Midnight Express team, and then Bobby Eaton and Condrey would be the Midnight Express when Eaton was brought in, and then Eaton and Stan Lane, and they would fuse with the original. We're talking like classic 80s wrestling here. But as the new Midnight Express, he would also win the NWA World Tag Team Championship from the Headbangers, and they would hold it for a little while, but he never achieved any other sort of notoriety as the new Midnight Express. Bob Sparkplug Holly, again, being that underdog babyface character, not really anything special. So he was just kind of there. He was, never really seen as a big player. In the late 90s, when WWE started transitioning to the Attitude Era, that's when you started to see more of Bob Holly. He competed in the 1998 Brawl for It All, losing in the first round to Bart Gunn, his former Midnight Express partner, Bombastic. I think he was Bombastic Bob, and Bart Gunn was Bodacious Bart. So here's Bombastic Bob and Bodacious Bart meeting in the first round of the Brawl for It All. If you don't remember the Brawl for It All, the Brawl for It All was a very ill-fated shoot-fighting tournament that actually saw Bart Gunn winning it all. He surprised everyone, but it was a shoot. It was a shoot tournament, shoot meetings. It wasn't work, meaning it wasn't, they didn't go to the back and say, all right, you're going to win. This is how. It's like they was like, no, let's see you guys really beat each other up. And Bart Gunn knocked out all of his opponents in the tournament, including Dr. Death Steve Williams, who a lot of people thought were going to win the tournament. And Hardcore Holly, or Bob Holly as he was known, only lost to Bart Gunn on points. He was the only one not to be knocked out by Bart Gunn. But Bart Gunn's reward for winning the whole tournament is at WrestleMania, he would face Butterbean and get knocked out in like 10 seconds. A very brutal knockout from Butterbean. It was a horrible idea. WWE, I don't know what they were thinking. Everyone who talks about, when they were involved with it, from Bob Holly, from, Bart Gunn and Jim Ross, and everyone who was a part of it, say it was a terrible idea. They don't know what they were thinking, but Bob Holly was a tough guy, and a lot of the people in that tournament, they wanted to prove something. They wanted to prove that they had something to offer to WWE, and he didn't want to be just kept to the bottom of the card. Ironically enough, after the Brawl for It All, Bob Holly would join the Job Squad. So him, Al Snow, and Too Cold Scorpio, one of my personal favorites of all time, joined the Job Squad, and they were basically a group of wrestlers who, they call themselves jobbers. And a jobber is essentially someone who just comes in to lose all the time, never really gets any win. And so, but they were like fan favorites. They would make run-ins during matches. They would score a few upset tag team matches here and there. Later, Dwayne Gilbert, one of the longest running jobbers of all time, would join the group, as well as the Blue Meanie, ECW alumni, and they formed a brief alliance with Mankind. And I mentioned the Job Squad, I believe, in my very first Hardcore Championship Let's Play when I talked about Mankind, because one of Mankind's Hardcore Championship defenses was a triple threat match against Shamrock and Big Boss Man, and it really was a 2-on-1 because both Shamrock and Boss Man were part of the corporation. So at the end, the Job Squad came in, helped Mankind win that match. Eventually Scorpio would get released, and they would do other things with Gilbert, do the whole Gilbert gimmick, and making fun of Goldberg, and Blue Meanie would do his own things, and he would be Blue Dust for a brief period, but he would leave eventually and go to ECW. No Job Squad attire in WWF No Mercy. In a few later episodes, I'm gonna be doing an Al Snow Hardcore Championship run, and it's sad because I wanted to have him wear his Job Squad outfit, but they don't have any of the Job Squad attire in this game. In WrestleMania 2000, they do, but they don't have any Job Squad attire. Also, Too Cold Scorpio and Dwayne Gill, the only Job Squad members not to be included in WrestleMania 2000, which I thought was interesting. I wonder how that adds up in the timeline. I wonder if Too Cold Scorpio possibly should have been included in WrestleMania 2000, but they just didn't. How awesome would that have been if Too Cold Scorpio was in WrestleMania 2000? There we go, beating Crash again. That's just the story of these two, and we're gonna get to that. We're getting to that right now, pretty much, because after the Job Squad, that's when we would see the transition. So Al Snow would become. Well, no, actually, that's not true. He didn't become Hardcore Champion, but Al Snow goes out. And, there's already friction, there's already drama with the Job Squad, and Al Snow goes out and he has a match against himself, and Bob Holly comes out to stop him, and Al Snow doesn't want to be stopped, so they end up fighting, and this leads into a match at St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and In Your House pay-per-view. I've mentioned that pay-per-view many times. You had the Vince McMahon and Stone Cold Steve Austin steel cage match. That was the debut of the Big Show, Paul White. You also had one of the last man standing matches between The Rock and Mankind. Val Venus won the Intercontinental Championship against Ken Shamrock. So I've mentioned the St. Valentine's Massacre pay-per-view. A lot happened, and that was the first night that Bob Holly would win the Hardcore Championship. Yes, he was still called Bob Holly, and they made a lot of references to his early days of WWF as Sparkplug, as never being considered a player in WWF, as, someone who was always on the bottom of the ladder, and this could be the turnaround for it. And, they basically just fought. They didn't even fight in the ring. They fought all the way to the back, through the arena, outside, all the way down to the base of the Mississippi River. Okay, it took place at the Pyramid Arena in Memphis, Tennessee. So the Mississippi River, apparently, part of it was right like a block or two away, and they fought down there by the riverbank, throwing themselves in. It's in February, it's freezing cold outside, they're throwing themselves in the Mississippi River. Like, talk about Bob Holly and Al Snow really trying to establish themselves as someone who has something to offer. And that's kind of what the hardcore division became in the beginning. After I talked about in my Mankind episode how it was really a prop to service Mankind's rise to the world title picture, and it really helped establish his legacy as someone who has fought all over the world in hardcore matches. But after that, they kind of didn't really know what to do with it, so it became just sort of a vehicle for a lot of underused guys to go out there. It's like, all right, show us what you got, beat the crap out of each other, and they did. And Hardcore Holly, he was as tough as they come. He was one of the toughest guys. People would talk about it a lot. There's been a lot of stories, a lot of write-ups, and we'll get to more of that in a bit. Here we go, big Falcon Arrow through the table. Take that, Taka Michinoku. Giving him a little taste of his own medicine. Obviously, the Michinoku driver, the Falcon Arrow. You choose which one you like more, but right now, the Falcon Arrow wins out against the Michinoku driver, putting Taka through the table. So yeah, he would beat him. They would fight outside. He would wrap him up in some spare chain link fence, and he would beat him. And that was sort of the birth of Hardcore Holly. And the Job Squad was over. Fun fact, neither one of them were Hardcore Champion. Road Dogg was the Hardcore Champion, but Road Dogg, storyline, he got attacked backstage. No one knew who attacked them, so the title was vacated due to injuries. This was all storyline, and Bob Holly and Al Snow fought for the vacant title. So Bob Holly got his first championship. He was the fourth ever Hardcore Champion. Isn't that crazy? He was the fourth ever Hardcore Champion, and he would defeat Steve Blackman in a hardcore match the next night. A couple of weeks after that, Bart Gunn would return. He would face Bart Gunn, sort of closing the story on Bob Holly. And that's what was really cool, looking back at the early history of Hardcore Holly, the birth of Hardcore Holly. It's pretty cool because they really did make an effort to establish, yeah, this guy had a terrible gimmick. He was a race car driver. He was a nobody. He was a jobber. But here he was all these years. He's still here. He's still kicking it. He's still going out there and proving himself. And now he's sort of becoming reborn. And that was kind of cool. That was kind of neat and interesting to see something like that. Be very, very forward thinking, really, very progressive in terms of storytelling. WWE being very cognizant at the time of their, quote unquote, new generation and how it didn't really work out. We got Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, but it didn't really work out as planned. They're getting killed in the ratings. NWO is creeping up, and now they're transitioning into Attitude Era without really knowing it. So to see a character like Bob Holly be acknowledged, like, yeah, he was like nobody. He was really a laughing stock, but now you got to take him seriously because look at him going out there fighting these hardcore matches. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. A lot of people talk about today in modern WWE, they don't really acknowledge a lot of their past or certain characters when they come back. Biggest example I think was the recent when Prince Albert came back, aka Tenzai, Jason Albert. They don't even acknowledge him that he was Prince Albert. It's like we all know who that is. That's Albert. That's Prince Albert. Obviously, if you were following Japanese wrestling, following New Japan, he was over there tearing it up with Carl Anderson, okay? And he was a monster over there as Giant Bernard. But when he comes back to WWF, they don't even acknowledge it. They're like, no, don't worry about it. Primo and Epico, even right now, the Shining Stars, they're not really acknowledging them as the Lost Matadores. So WWE still, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. But honestly, in my opinion, when the transition from Bob Holly to Hardcore Holly, they got it right. That was a great way to do that. It really got the fans behind him. Because he would come out and people would cheer. They were excited to see Bob Holly as the hardcore champion. So here I go, taking the bribe from the APA. Not fighting the APA in the hardcore championship paths really cuts down on the time of the videos, so I love that. So he would hold the title for a bit, lose it to Billy Gunn, stemming off of the whole Road Dogg angle, and then win it back at WrestleMania 15 in a triple threat match against Al Snow and Billy Gunn. So here's a cool thing about Hardcore Holly's next hardcore championship runs. He would lose it about a month later to Al Snow at Backlash, which, fun fact, was the last In Your House pay-per-view to have the name In Your House and the first Backlash pay-per-view. And I bring that up because they're actually bringing Backlash back, and Backlash was the rumored sequel to WWF No Mercy. Not rumored sequel, it was in development, but then it got canceled. So he would lose it to Al Snow at In Your House Backlash. And then in August of 1999, Crash Holly would come in. He would be introduced as Hardcore Holly's cousin. The two would fight as much as they would team up, challenge for the tag team titles, and win it on one occasion. And then after a few months of that, Crash Holly would win the Hardcore Championship on February 24th, 2000 episode of SmackDown. I'll go into more detail of that when I do my Crash Holly run. But Hardcore Holly would start challenging for the title against his own cousin during the 24/7 rule, and he would win it at WrestleMania 16 at the end of the Hardcore Battle Royal, if I've mentioned a few times on this. And I also have a standard, gameplay reenactment of that video, of that match on my channel. It's pretty long, but it's fun. And that's pretty much a year since his second Hardcore Championship. So here he is, a whole year, and he's just not even involved with the Hardcore Championship too heavily. And then he comes back and wins it. That win actually was a botched ending. Hardcore Holly wasn't supposed to win. He mentioned it on Jim Ross's podcast when he was interviewed. The next night, he would lose it back to Crash Holly because they made a mistake. Crash Holly was supposed to retain at the end of it, but something was off with the timing and, the sequence of the events. After WrestleMania in June of 2000, he would get a broken arm in a match against Kurt Angle that I still remember to this day. Oh, that was such a gruesome injury watching him. Kurt Angle went for a moonsault and broke Hardcore Holly's arm. Molly Holly would be introduced during this time while he was injured. I'll probably talk about more about Molly Holly when I do the tag team as well. And then here we go, coming back a year later, he would win the Hardcore Championship again for a fourth time on an episode of SmackDown against Raven. So his third and fourth championship reigns were all spread out pretty much a year apart, you know? He would win it the second time, and then a year later win it the third time, and then a year later win it the fourth time, even under the Hardcore 7 rules. You know, but that fourth victory came under the 24/7 rules. He would lose it right away, right back to Raven. He beat Raven and then would lose it right back to Raven. And then his fifth and sixth title reigns, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, his fifth and sixth title reigns came at house shows. So we never even got to see those title reigns. So that's Holly's Hardcore Championship legacy. You know, I think a lot of people associate Hardcore Holly with the Hardcore era, you know, the Attitude Era, and obviously him calling himself Hardcore Holly. But, you know, his Hardcore Championship, you know, it probably was most significant in the beginning. Hardcore Holly, I think, like I said in the beginning, is a very divisive persona, very divisive character in the world of wrestling because he was always rumored to be a lot tougher and meaner than even his on-screen persona was. He was a pretty tough, surly kind of guy on screen, and he never really seemed like the nicest guy around, and there was a lot of rumors that he wasn't the nicest guy around. Obviously, being with the company for such a long time, you know, you develop a reputation, and another big controversial moment came, two. It was kind of back to back a little bit. So when Brock Lesnar came out in the beginning of 2002, Bob Holly, you know, Hardcore Holly would have a match with him a couple of months later. And during the match, allegedly, you know, people claim Hardcore Holly tried to sandbag Brock Lesnar. If you watch the clip, you know, it's debatable. But it definitely looks like Brock Lesnar can't get him up for whatever reason. And this is Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar can get anyone up. You know, he's super strong. So, you know, there might be some truth to that sandbagging. And so Brock Lesnar just dropped him on his neck and broke his neck. And he was out for a bit. While he was out, he makes an appearance on the third season of Tough Enough. So he was a trainer on the second season of Tough Enough. And he brutalizes one of the contestants while they're just working a tag match in the ring. Matt Cappotelli just absolutely beats the crap out of him during this exhibition sparring match in which Bob Holly was just a guest. So, you know, he developed a reputation after that of, you know, it started to come a little bit more to light after that, like, oh, maybe the rumors are true. Maybe Bob Holly is a really mean, tough guy. During his interview with JR on JR's podcast, which I recommend anyone listening to and subscribing to, he did, you know, admit that he had a bit of a mean streak and he did have a temper. But he claims that he never went out of his way to ever hurt anyone or sabotage anyone in the ring, that he would never do that. So he never really intentionally sandbagged Brock Lesnar. He never intentionally meant to hurt Matt Cappotelli and any other person he stepped in the ring with. But he doesn't deny his behavior. But, you know, he doesn't excuse it either. You know, he just says this was kind of the time. This is how we were trained. This is how we was what wrestling was a different animal back then. I mean, this was a guy who spent 15 years in the company before he was released. He went through 3 different generations, the new generation, the Attitude Era, and the Ruthless Aggression Era. So he saw it all. And, you know, coming in from when he was brought in, wrestling was a lot different. So Hardcore Holly, yeah, he was hardcore, but a lot of it had to do with who he was as a person, but he also, you know, claims that everyone was hardcore back then. So, you know, there's a lot. He has a book, The Hardcore Truth, the Bob Holly story, which I kind of want to read. I kind of want to find out more about the behind the scenes, you know, hear his perspective of what really went down and what a lot of the truth is to the Hardcore Holly persona and the gimmick and how much difference there is. But That's all I got for you tonight. Again, no APA means a much shorter video, so that's kind of fun, right? You know, I get to avoid that big long match. So anyway, I'm Be Better Gamer. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned. I got a lot more fun episodes. As always, until next time, keep watching all the wrestling. Thank you.